Hello, this is September 16th, and today we are reading our gospel passage for the week, which comes from Mark 9, verses 30 through 37. They went on from there and passed through Galilee. He did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him, and 3 days after being killed he will rise again." But they did not understand what he was saying, and were afraid to ask him. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So, today we are reading a gospel lesson in which, again, Jesus wants to talk about his death and his resurrection. But the disciples first don't want to hear about his death, and they have no idea what he's talking about when he says he'll be resurrected. So, their reaction is to ignore it. You ever ignore a conversation or avoid a conversation you don't want to have? The disciples are doing that desperately. They just would really rather not talk about Jesus being arrested. The worst fulfillment of a possible scenario they must have thought, since Jesus was clashing with public figures, a figure as public as Herod. Jesus is in danger, and the disciples really don't want to talk about it. Even if Jesus is trying to assure them, no, these things have to happen. These things have to happen so that the Father's will can be done. They're avoiding the conversation. And so, like most avoidant conversations, they talk about something else. And they talk about ranking each other, which, sounds a lot like other conversations that can be had among a group of competitive people. If you've ever been on a team, I was on a wrestling team. I wasn't very good in high school, and there were always conversations about who was the better wrestler in their weight class, who could wrestle who could punch above their weight, who was a better wrestler pound for pound than the person in the higher weight class. These are constant conversations that were had. And for those who were actually competitive, they were interesting conversations. I was never in that. I struggled on the JV squad. But for people who are interested in such things, this is a much more engaging conversation than something confusing about being betrayed and resurrected. And so they argue about who is the greatest. Peter probably had his say. John probably had his say. And Jesus' response to the answer about who the greatest disciple is not to say, "Oh, well, it's Peter," or, "Oh, well, obviously it's John," or anybody else. Jesus' response is to avoid the conversation himself. Jesus, again, redirects their attention. And so, in the way that a good teacher will explain a concept in different ways, Jesus finds a new way to explain the concept of his death and his coming resurrection. Jesus is trying to explain why it is that he would hand himself over to the authorities. Jesus is trying to explain how the paradox of servanthood, that he has to be the suffering servant that Isaiah spoke of. Jesus is trying to set forth why someone who is going to be first, must be last, and servant of all. The disciples are interested in seeing who's the top. Jesus is saying, if you are not seeking to be the servant of your neighbor, if you're not seeking to be the servant of your fellow Christian or your fellow disciple, then you're not You're not in the running at all. And he makes a point that this is not some sort of like, oh, I'm last. This also does not meant to be a race to the bottom, a show of our own humility. It's not about showing humility. It is about genuine self-effacement, about genuinely not seeking glory. So how do you do that? Jesus, like uses another tool that good teachers use. Jesus uses an object lesson. He takes a little child and put it among them. Whose little child is it? It's hard to say. Maybe it was one of the disciples' children. Maybe it was a child of one of the female disciples that don't get mentioned nearly enough in the Gospels. But Jesus takes it in his arms and he says, whoever welcomes this child, whoever's concern is for the lowest of them, of these, they are the ones who are seeing God among them. Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me. So, by the power of connection here, this attributive power that Jesus is giving to this child, he's saying, whoever is welcoming, whoever is the servant of this child, is the servant of me. And whoever is a servant of me is ultimately serving God the Father who sent me. And this isn't in any way a means to show how good of servant leaders we are, or to push ourselves to the top, to be authoritative by being humble. No, this is genuine, true humility. Jesus is he is desperately trying for the disciples to be prepared for the coming trauma of Jerusalem, for the trauma of Good Friday that's on the way. But he has to break it into small bites, small teachable bites, so that they can wrap their brains around it, be ready for the resurrection when it comes. The same is true for us. Life for us is a preparation for the resurrection, for our own resurrection into Christ. When we die, our death is not a final death, but is a preparation for the truer life, whatever that looks like. And Jesus is saying, you need to die to yourself. You need to put your ego aside, because that's not the thing that's going to be resurrected. It is your life in Christ as a servant. Jesus is turning the disciples' attention away completely with this very simple object lesson. That is our gospel for this week. I hope you can join us for Sunday worship. I hope to be using these Word of the Day videos as a way of getting us ready for Sundays, and to soon be posting Sunday worship online on both Facebook and YouTube. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.